Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the 817 podcast. We've got an exciting episode today with a number of really interesting stories that came out this week, as well as having a special guest, our first one of 2022, Harrison Mantas, the government reporter from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, joins us to talk about what it's like being a government reporter in Fort Worth and what his feel on a lot of the big things happening in the city are. So I'm excited to dive in. What was your feel for things this week?
Yeah, I mean, what's cool with having Harrison on to be a guest, it's going to be really important for the stories that we're going to talk about. So we're going to get to the stories so we can leave enough runway for the conversation with Harrison, but then also get to wins and losses. But before we jump into what I think Harrison will help us with is we have 7 maps for redistricting that's going to be proposed next week. And we also had some city council discussions around city council payments and things like that I think he's going to be able to get to. But before we hit those stories, hope everybody's doing well. I know Omicron's going rampant throughout Tarrant County, and so hopefully everyone's safe and doing well. And you've been able to manage school, work, and all the other things in your life. But let's go ahead and hit the New York Times article, Jimmy. I know you sent this to me, and I know it was a discussion on Twitter. So go ahead and tell us about the New York Times article. Man, Fort Worth in the New York Times twice in a row. Well,
yeah, twice in like a month.
Yeah.
So the New York Times published an article on January 6th about the best and worst places for singles to rent studios. The way that they looked at this, the study from RentHop's Singles Index was how much is the median single person, single income paying for a studio apartment in a city? What percent of their income is going towards that? And lo and behold, Fort Worth showed up as one of the least affordable cities in the U.S. So the median studio rent in Fort Worth is $1,264.
Crazy.
So crazy. And the percent of income spent on rent is 27% of the median single income. Yeah, that's a bad list to be on, especially when you look 5 miles, 10 miles east, and Arlington is one of the 10 most affordable at $790 for median studio rent, which is 19% of median single income there. I was a little surprised to see Fort Worth pop up on here. I don't know. What did you think?
Yeah, this is over Miami, Austin, over Dallas. So it seems really weird, but it also just takes in, like Jimmy said, the median salary. And we probably are sitting at a very blue collar, gritty worker salary. So for instance, let's say we're in the 40s somewhere for single median salary. I bet Austin's 10 to 15,000 more than us. So then even if they do have more expensive apartments, their people are going to be able to afford. And I think that's the divide. I think Fort Worth real estate is trying to play this economic boom game where, we're about to get a bunch of companies and white collar jobs. And if we had a local recession, which I think it could be around us over indexing luxury apartments and the demand and the price and what a salaried person could afford, doesn't say yes to that. Instead, they decide to still live at home with mom, or they decide to move to Arlington. Because this just, to me, has always been the confusing part. How are we putting up all these expensive apartments, but we don't have all these economic middle-class jobs for young people?
Yeah, I think that luxury apartment builders are treating Fort Worth like it's Dallas when it's actually Arlington or Waco even. And I wonder what the demographic of singles is in Fort Worth. I would imagine it's heavy service industry, probably heavy industrial also.
Manufacturing.
When the price of rent is geared towards tech jobs, basically. And so there's a pretty big imbalance there, and there has to be a tipping point at somewhere along the road. Like, apartments can't just keep sitting empty. I don't know, maybe they can. But I would think that prices are going to have to come down, because I just don't see that type of person moving to Fort Worth instead of Dallas, Plano, Frisco, any of those places. I don't know, if I saw that Arlington was $500 cheaper a month, like, you can spend that money on Ubers and going out and doing things. Like, that's a significant portion of your paycheck to just move 10 miles down the road to another, like, cool place.
No, we'll put the graph in the description so you can kind of see it yourself. But it was interesting to see Fort Worth on a least affordable list when we always say it's an affordable city to be in. You want to go ahead and move into the city council stuff, and let's kind of dive into what we got there?
Yeah. So it came up this week for a potential charter election that the idea or conversation around raising city council and mayor pay, as well as thoughts on term limits, length of term, and all of that potentially going on to a charter election in May or November. There's a lot to unpack with this, and I'm sure we will in more and more in coming weeks. But if you didn't know, city councilors get paid like $20,000 a year, and the mayor gets paid, I think it's $27,000.
The mayor's salary is currently $29,000, and council members is $25,000.
So, not very much money for what is more than a full-time job. And
Austin mayor, $97,656.
And like, I think our city planner makes $350K, or city manager makes like $350K. I feel
like that's the best job in Fort Worth, because, well, from a city side, because you make all the money, but then you don't have to deal with the scrutiny that city council and the mayor has to deal with, because you're like the puppet in the back. I mean, if I'm sitting in a circle and I'm Maddie, Jared, Carrie, and I'm looking at Cook, I feel like I would want to, like, that would be the bitterness of, like, you get to make a good chunk of change.
Yeah, start paying for my dinners.
Well, I got to deal with all the slack.
Yeah. So that's a conversation that's going to come up. The last time that raising pay came up on a charter election, it was shot down. There were obviously issues with how well that was communicated, and just when it goes on the ballot. Carrie Moon was trying to say that we need to get this on a nonpartisan May election, but we have a gubernatorial election in November. Like, why are we going to put stuff like this on a ballot that gets 3% voter turnout when we could put it on one that's going to get 15 to 18% voter turnout? It goes without saying that these people need to be paid more. Like,
do you think that's the average? Like, if it was on the big ballot, do you think that's the average, like, Fort Worthian's opinion? Because I mean, we believe that, but you know, if you're just an average person and you're here, your city people wants to take more money.
I mean, I think
it would need to be significant. That's the other thing.
It needs to be
like,
significant.
Like a minimum $20,000 increase. Now you're making 49.
Yeah,
45.
Which is still nothing for the amount of time you're putting in. But current state, like, you can only be a city councilor or the mayor if you can afford to. Like, if you're the second income earner in a household, or if you have enough, like, built up wealth or passive income, because you can't. I mean, it is very hard to support a family on $25,000 a year, and we know that people do it, but it's not something we should be striving for, and not something that we should be limiting our public officials with. But I think it takes communication. Like, city councilors need to be able to communicate with their constituency. This is what I do. This is the amount of time I put into what I'm doing. This is where my shortcomings are because I can't afford to put in any more time or effort into this. I don't have a team that I can pay to make my like web of influence grow. So like if we want to get stuff done as a city, we need to invest in this. And it's I think a similar conversation to schools. Like if we want schools to improve, we need to invest in them. If we want our local government to be able to do more, we have to invest in it. But like we're in a conservative voting city, especially when it comes to local elections, and saying that any part of the government other than the police department needs more money is taboo. So I am not if it's on a May ballot, like I don't think there's any way that it passes. Like this needs to be on a ballot with elections that people will turn up for so that we can actually get a sense of the city's view on this. Or we can just continue to fund a government that can't function to its maximum capacity because it doesn't have the ability to do so.
Yeah. So obviously we're pro giving our city council members a real salary, a big person salary for a big city, because that's who they are. Term limits. We hadn't hit term limits. We kind of discussed pre. You felt like that's a kind of a conversation that doesn't really need to happen.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, term limits elected officials have term limits already because voters have the opportunity to get rid of them. Like when we're talking about something like a Supreme Court or judgeship position that is not elected, like I think there's a legitimate conversation to how long should you be there. But Jungus Jordan got voted out because his constituents wanted something different. Like he hit his term limit because because his constituency didn't think that he was serving them better than Jared Williams could. And like there's that baked in voting term limit idea. So
I think it was Jared Williams who recommended the term limits. Everyone else seemed pretty not about it.
Yeah, I know that I can't remember
Elizabeth
if
Nettles wasn't about it.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly. I definitely remember Jared being for it.
Yeah.
And I get the idea of like wanting to get new blood into the council chamber, but you could also just win the election.
Yeah, that was my take, was the ripple effect of let's say over 20 years. Term limits was 5 years or 4 years. You now would get 5 different representatives in a 20-year time. And I think a lot of people get activated about politics because they know someone in politics or someone's running for politics, right? When I look at Tara Wilson's running for office, there was probably a lot of people in District 4 where that was their first time voting. You know, I look at Jared Williams against Jungus, there's probably a lot of people who that was their first time voting. And now that's not going to be their last, and they're going to vote every single year. And so if you want to get more an activated city into voting, I think the more and more people see people running, it creates those little network effects, these micro clusters of people who then will stay voting because now they're excited about and involved with it. They realize it's not that hard. It's not that difficult. But yeah, totally not something I'm super passionate about, but I could see maybe where Jared was coming from.
Yeah. And then the other piece was, should the term be 3 years? Should they be staggered so that we're not electing all of them at the same time? And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with how we're paying them. Like campaigning is another full-time job that we're already adding to an underpaid full-time job. So if we're going to continue to only pay these people to do a part-time job, like maybe we do need to make it 3 years so that they have a little more bandwidth to not just be campaigning. I do like the kind of like the idea of staggering the council, because you're getting a more dynamic group in there. Like it's changing more. There's opportunity for maybe decisions to change it faster because the makeup of the council is shifting. So I don't know. Those are both ones where it's like, I think we need to answer the first two questions first to really be able to answer the last two. But interesting that this conversation is coming up now. I think they have until like mid-February to decide if it would go on a May ballot. And then obviously longer to if it were to go to November. But like we saw with the school board bonds, like what happens when you try and rush these things into it. And it kind of seemed like the people who were against changes were trying to rush this onto a May ballot, probably to, make sure the status quo of voters are the ones turning out.
Well, before we, and I bet Harrison will have some takes on this as well. But before we get to that, we're going to have one more short story, and then we're going to have a conversation with Harrison Mantas, who covers the city of Fort Worth's government, agencies, and people at the Star-Telegram. Really excited to have him as he's a friend of the show. The third and final story we're going to talk about that's also big is that the Redistricting Task Force selects 7 maps for further consideration that will be shared with the City Council on 6 p.m. at January 13th. So we're going to see 7 maps that were selected, and they were going to have a discussion. And then there's several other additional map meeting schedules that we could participate in. This will also be in the notes. You have January 24th, 2 p.m., City Hall, room 2020. The task force will discuss proposed maps and select an initial map for City Council to consider. February 1st, the task force will present an initial map at City Council work session. February 8th, the public may address City Council either in person or by phone, and have this public hearing. And then we'll also have a working session February 15th. There's so many ways to get involved. Would love for you to share your opinion with the maps. But Jimmy, what was your opinion of the 7 maps selected?
Yeah, we'll get into this more in the coming weeks and with Harrison. The most notable thing to me was that the map that City Council voted to submit was not one of the ones selected by the Redistricting Committee, which a previous criticism from the Redistricting Committee was that they didn't understand their purpose necessarily if City Council was already getting to submit their own map. Like, wouldn't they just vote to approve theirs afterwards? So I don't know if that was playing in the back of their minds as they didn't select it as one to go back to City Council, but that was the most notable thing to me, was that of the 7, they didn't keep that one in consideration. Granted, City Council can just not listen to them and approve their own map, but as of now, it seems like the one that they voted for seems to be out of the running.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably a good transition to bring Harrison on. I'm going to go ahead and read his bio. All right, so really excited to have Harrison Mantas on the pod. Again, he's a government reporter at Star-Telegram. He previously covered fact-checking and misinformation at Poynter Institute in St. Petersburg, Florida, as well as local, state, and federal politics in Phoenix, Arizona, and Washington, D.C. He likes to live tweet City Hall. He is our City Hall person. Luke was doing it. Passed the mantle to Harrison. And really excited to have him because he's a friend of the pod and someone who gives the pod a love. And we're going to talk about the short stories that we just discussed, as he's the one who's really on the ground, sharing that information, helping us be better citizens. So here is Harrison Mantas.
So my Fort Worth story, I came here from Florida. I was working, I grew up in the Northeast, but I was working in Florida, covering misinformation and disinformation for the Poynter Institute and working with fact checking and the International Fact Checking Network. And then a friend of mine who she now works at KERA, Kaylee Broussard, we went to school at ASU together. She told me that this job at the Star Telegram was open, and this kind of reporting, city government reporting, is really the kind of stuff I really like doing, because it's where the rubber hits the road. I think this kind of the thing I think journalism is supposed to do are be the representative of people at the municipal functions they don't have time to be at for themselves, which, if you've ever been to a public comment meeting, you can see, like, there's Bob Willoughby, Thomas Turlin-Kazi, James Smith, and George Childs, like, and that's it usually. And then maybe one or two other people will call in, but like nobody shows up to that. And that's sort of, and the only time people show up to city council is if they got a zoning hearing, basically. And it's my job to be there for all those people who can't be there. So that's what brought me to Fort Worth. And I've been loving it, just diving in. And I worked in DC briefly, so I got the experience of just calling people on the phone and chasing people down through hallways and stuff like that, and sort of the ins and outs of government reporting and things like that. And it's just been really cool coming to Fort Worth and trying to figure out what this city is, what people care about, and try to do my best to ask city council, like, hey, what the heck are you doing to make sure that that's happening? So I'm not there. I'm not 100% there yet. I'm still working on it, but it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. What's it been like coming into Fort Worth? Like, how have you gone about getting to know the city and getting to know who the people pulling the strings are? Because I'm sure that's hard enough when, like, that's apparent right in front of you, and maybe even harder in a place where it feels like there's a lot of the room where it happens sort of vibe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been doing the social media thing, like, honestly, not gonna lie, I'm not just saying this because I'm here and I'm trying to puff up your ego, but you guys were one of the first podcasts I listened to when I was taking my road trip across from Florida to here. It was I was reading or listening to Forget the Alamo on tape, and then you guys, and then a Texas history podcast in there. So trying to, like, listen to the different podcasters and the different people who are talking about what this city is and sort of taking from that. I listen to you guys on Mondays usually when I'm walking to work, just to be like, okay, what did I screw up last week? Or what are the things that we didn't cover that we need to cover? What are the things? So listening to that, listening to the activist class, things like that, trying to, my big thing that I didn't do enough in last year, I mean, it was only 3 months, but still, is like going out and getting coffee with people and trying to talk with people. So I'm trying to meet with more people, talk to them, ask them what is, like we talked about my Fort Worth story when I got here, when we started the pod here, and basically, what's your Fort Worth story? What is it about this city that makes it tick? And then the other thing too is Bud Kennedy, who's our he's sort of he's like the giver at the Star Telegram. he is the easiest way to describe him. So basically, anytime I don't understand something, it's like, Bud, can you tell me something about this? And then he'll give me, it's like the whole history of it, and just sort of like picking his ear. So that's the basic stuff of what I've done. I know it hasn't been enough. I'm the big, I live in the near south side, and the Hemphill district's just down the street from me. So I'm always looking at the Hemphill and Sabende stuff more recently, and just trying to figure out, because with the big story is growth in Fort Worth, and trying to figure out who gets left out, who, how do we become an inclusive city? How do we make sure that people don't get left behind? Because I lived in California so brief history of my life, just for context. Born in Philly. Greek family, would have to live within 10 miles of the diner, so we moved to South Jersey. My folks, my mom and my dad split up when I was 3. My mom and my mom got together. We lived in Atlanta. We lived in London for a year because my mom worked at CNN and she got a job out there. And then we lived in Boston, where I spent my formative years. And then I was in California for 10 years, Arizona, Florida, and here. But when I was in California, I really saw how gentrification and displacement kind of screwed a lot of things up,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term. Because it's, it's complicated. It's like, oh, we're making investments. We're finally fixing that road that we never fixed. But who are we fixing it for? And it's sort of, I've seen it happen in other places. Like when I was in Arizona, I remember going to Arizona and thinking like, hey, how's gentrification and everything? And they're like, oh, we're really not seeing it here now. And now you can't get a house in Phoenix for less than like 400 grand. It gets you a shack in Phoenix when like the median home for, we're seeing it here in Fort Worth. It's so it's interesting trying to see that here and what's going on with that. I'm trying to figure out because we as a newspaper, we're supposed to tell the city's stories. We're trying to, and not just everybody, and trying to figure out who's not getting told and how things are actually impacting people, and so that people can read it and then make the decisions at the ballot box. Like, is this how we want to be as a city, or we want to do something different? And if we want to do it the same, then fine. But as long as you have the information, that's the most important thing. People need to have the info.
Yeah, you mentioned how you go to Bud, and I feel like that is the when I think about a lot of the challenges in journalism is all this great talent comes, and then like they're only here for so long, and then they have to go, right? We just talked about Jessica Priest going to Texas Tribune. Like it's a constant kind of thing. How's that dialogue between journalists, and is that seems to me as a reader, when I get the survey from Star Telegram, what do you want to improve? I'm like, keep your journalists. That's basically what I write. But what's your guys' take internally about the often going and then having to try to rewrite stories on cities that you're trying to just learn about as you've been here for a quarter?
Yeah, no, it's hard. I mean, honestly, thank God we have Bud. If I have to take a little bit out of my paycheck to make sure that he has universal health care for the rest of his life, and I will, or do something to find a way to just get all of his, I don't know, but thank God for Bud, honestly. It's one of the things I do, sort of low key worry about at the Star Telegram is we've got great journalists. Like, you've seen Nicole Manna's work with 76104. Kayla Johnson's really good. Like all these people who have been there, but I think most of the people who have been there in the reporting class are been there only a handful of years. And we're trying to we're building back up the newsroom, but like we got like 20 reporters for a city of 1 million people. It's just not enough. It's not enough. And we're missing stuff. I mean, honestly, like at the Star Telegram, we're like, the Fort Worth Report, like they're coming in and da-da-da. But honestly, thank God for the Fort Worth Report, because like we would drop the ball so much if it wasn't for them trying to push us to be better. And KRA now with Kaylee Broussard going over there and beefing up their Arlington coverage, that's really good. And then Miranda Suarez just got a bump over at KRA too. Her and I are both going to be at city council meetings now, so it's going to be really great having that, because now she's going to be bringing her contributions to it, and we'll be able to go back and forth off each other, and we'll be pushing each other to do better. So thank God for the other outlets we have in town, frankly, because we need it. The city desperately needs it. It deserves it, because it's a really great place. Yeah. It's a really wonderful place, and it's a city that deserves good journalism. And we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, your reference about number of reporters, do you have like a comparison for a similarly sized city of like what a healthy newsroom would look like?
At our heyday, we had 500 employees at the paper.
Jesus.
Wow.
At our heyday. Now, granted, this was a while ago. This was like 2000. I had a professor at the Cronkite School at ASU who used to work at the San Francisco Chronicle, and she was saying how in the 90s, they were talking in the newsroom was, do we need to be worried about this website Craigslist? like do we need? And I was just like, oh my God. And like that's how bad it's been. Like they haven't been. The newspaper industry is a whole other Michigas.
Yeah.
There's problems in journalism beyond just the newspaper industry. Those are the ones that are most apparent. But yeah, no, I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but to get to the, Star Telegram used to have 500 people. We have employees. That's everybody. That's advertising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's not just reporters. But I think, was it in Phoenix, when I was in Phoenix back in 2018, 2019, I think the Republic had like 80 and they cut back to 50.
Okay.
And that was seen as like, oh my God. And we're similarly sized, I think, to the Phoenix metro area. So yeah, we should have, I mean, I would like all of the reporters in all of the places, but you know, we can't have that.
Yeah.
But we also, you know, to be honest with you, we need to do, I'm going to go on a rant about journalism.
Yeah.
It's
That's
be
great.
very long, but we need to do more to engage. And we're trying to do that now. We're trying to do more audience engagement. We're trying to tailor our product a little bit more to get people, because if people don't know why they should care about the paper, they're not going to care about it. This is people get the journalism that they want, and just, you know, and they get the government that they want because they get what they show up for, you know. So it's us too needing to engage with it, but it's what people want too. So it's a vicious cycle, as it were. Yeah.
Well, what are some stories you're excited for this year, and things that you're curious about as a government reporter?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for I'm excited. I mean, it's not going to be until 2023, obviously, because we're going to have to get redistricting first before we get the 2 new seats. But I'm interested to see where the map ultimately winds up and how that changes the makeup of politics in Fort Worth. I don't know if that'll have an impact until next year when we get the 2 new people, but like eventually we're going to get people running for it. So that'll be new, and what happens with that. I'm interested to see, you know, just again, looking more on the growth stories, but also we're going to be, the bond election is going to be the big one that's coming up in May, and trying to, you know, build out more roads and things like that. That's the thing with government reporting, is a lot of times it's very sort of like, hey, I'm really excited about a road that's getting built. And people are like, why do you care about a road? It's like, well, you know, it's hard to get people to care about a road, which is why so few people vote in bond elections, unfortunately. But these are the things that I'm you know, sort of very interested in. It's sort of this year, there's the municipal elections, which are sort of, they try to make them nonpartisan, but there's a lot of opportunities this year for citizens to decide what kind of city we want to be. And I'm excited to see how that shakes out.
Yeah, the funny catch-22 about people not being excited about bond elections is that it's probably like the thing that they complain about the most is like, oh, it's taking me too long to get to work. Like, these potholes suck. Like, why has it been so long since this has gotten fixed? We need more lights out here. But then when it comes to actually engaging on it, it's like, oh, no, I didn't know that we voted on a $500 million bond last year. Like, I had no idea. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, only 3% of the population showed up to vote. Like, and they get to control the money of the city. So it's funny that like that continues to be the thing that people complain about, but don't put any effort into trying to fix. Yeah.
I mean, like I said, it's the veggies. It's there. I can understand. So like Luke Ranker, who preceded me, is studying to be he's studying, you know, urban planning at New Michigan, and I can understand why. This job, like, I almost feel like you need at least a minor to do this job, because so much of what we cover is urban planning, and people don't think about urban planning because people don't think, you know, it's not front of mind of when you live in a city. You don't think of like, oh, maybe this road should be a little different. I mean, you do when, like, the things that you think about are, there's people speeding down the street, there's kids getting hit by cars. You know, those are the things you think about, but all of those things come from decisions that are made at City Hall about things that are sort of very nerdy urban planning stuff. And trying to find a way to translate government into human is a challenge.
Yeah. Well, what can you kind of, I guess, I know a lot of it's been about the bond and the roads and the growth. Where is your perspective on it currently, and what do you feel like most Fort Worthians are telling you, or how do you see that perspective, because I know we have a unique perspective and we really hit our perspective home on the pod. But what I love about guests is they sometimes share with us like things we should be considering more.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, like when you go outside the loop, especially up north. I mean, I did that story, before, back in December about people saying we haven't built up the roads enough. So, it's people up there are talking about how there's this crazy explosive growth and we don't have the infrastructure. So that's the big thing up there. My editor, especially because he lives up in the northeast Fort Worth, he was telling me a story about how his kids. He's been here for almost 20 years now, more than 20 years now. And he was telling me about how his sons, when they were in high school, totaled their truck like 3 or 4 times, like because there's on these 2-lane country roads become 4-lane country roads, and then you're trying to avoid potholes, and so those are the things that people are sort of telling me about up there. But to be honest with you, like that's the thing I still need to work the most on is learning more about what people care about all throughout the city, because we focus on how, anytime there's a big housing development going in or something like that, it's like, okay, boom, people are going to pick up on that, write a story about it really quick, get it up, and a bunch of people read it and stuff like that. People are always caring about like what they're going to get from the city or things like that. So people always seem to be interested in that. But the big thing, my big deficiency as a reporter, especially as a city government reporter, is still trying to go out and talk to more people and figure out what they think about Fort Worth and why they think it's special and what they think needs to happen. So like I'm trying to get more, like I'm meeting with more people for coffee. I'm talking with them more. I'm trying to do more face-to-face as much as you can with with Omicron going on right now, but to learn from people why, because I feel like I'm deficient in that a lot, to be honest with you.
And I think with the amount of distance to travel as a journalist, that would just be difficult as well. Just trying to report city news, and you have to go 20 miles north to get some perspective on how's Fort Worth there compared to in the loop.
To physically be there. But even within the loop, like I'm working on, so like I said, I'm working on a story about dangerous streets right now, and I was up in the north side. I was on 28th Street, right by the 35 right there, and it's one of the deadliest streets, both for car accidents and for cyclist accidents. And I'm walking around. I was like, oh, well, no wonder why. It's a freeway. Yeah. it's just people are buzzing down there, and they put a median in there, and like a concrete median, and it's like, okay, that's great. But now people can flip up and do, I don't know, some sort of fast and furious trick that they're not going to land. I don't know. It's crazy up there, but I think that's the thing I need to work most on personally, is these places that have been underserved. And I know, like, well-meaning white people, say, oh, we need to care more about underserved communities. And I'm not trying to do that, I will say, that crap. There are like genuine stories about places that have been neglected for a long time. Like when I was doing this story about the roads up north, we got this thing of city data of crashes in the city for just the month of November, because that was all that we could get online. And then we got more for all of 2021. So that's what we're working on now. And we did a scatter plot of all the crashes. And they were all most of them were all within the loop. Now, granted, a lot of them were on the freeways, but because, cars, that's where the crashes are going to be. Yeah. But most of them are in the loop. And I was like, all the growth is going on up north. There's all those people moving in there. There's these, tiny 2-lane roads with, extra traffic that can't handle them. You'd figure there'd be more stuff up there. But it's happening in the loop. And so there's, because of that, I need to find there. I know that there are stories there that aren't getting covered that I need to do more on. And so that's really where I'm like, I need to put my focus on, because I don't know about it. And, the city doesn't know enough about it. And maybe the city does, and they just aren't doing enough about it. But until people like me start making calls and rattling cages, like, stuff doesn't happen sometimes. Like, we had a redistricting meeting that got rescheduled because I called and said, hey, you guys didn't put the thing up. And they're like, oh crap, we didn't put the thing up. And not like, oh yeah, me,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like unless someone makes that phone call, they're not going to do it, and it's so that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and talking about redistricting, like we had a big meeting this week where the redistricting committee narrowed down to 7 maps. What's your pulse coming out of that this week on like what the process is going to look like moving forward, and maybe if you got a vibe at city council from the council members being presented with the 7 maps, notably not including the one that they submitted and voted on.
Yeah. Well, they haven't been presented them yet. The redistricting council has gone through them. There's the way I hope it'll work out and the way I think it's going to work out. The way I hope it'll work out is they've got a public meeting next Thursday at 6:00 at City Hall. People who wrote those 7 maps are going to present what their thought process was.
Okay.
And then people can, you and I, well, not me because, professional conflict of interest, but residents can show up, can talk and say, I like this map because of this, or I don't like this map because of this, or, anything they want to talk about. They've got 3 minutes to talk about it. Hopefully they keep it relevant. But so that's the way I hope it'll happen, is that a lot of people will show up and contribute, and the redistricting task force will get that feedback and use that to think about it when they create a map that they recommend to city council. The way I think it's going to happen is that I'm going to be in a very empty room with the usual people, and maybe a couple other people, and maybe like a 5 or 10, 10 people on the phone would be a lot, frankly, calling on the phone to talk about it. And then the redistricting task force is going to talk about a lot of nerdy stuff. It's going to take up a lot of time, and I'll probably be there until 9:00 at night because of them talking about the minutia. That's the way I think it's going to happen. So in terms of I think the other thing too that I haven't covered enough yet, but it's sort of how they're having discussions on in City Hall is at having another charter election. Last time, in terms of, there's been discussion about this in terms of raising their pay and term limits and things like that. But the other, I think there was some discussion. I don't remember if it was in the redistricting council or if it was in the work session, but there has been some discussion about putting in the city charter, having an independent redistricting commission.
Gotcha.
Where basically, because the way it works now is members of the city council appoint their people who represent their districts. The independent redistricting commission takes the maps, they evaluate them, they submit them to the city. The council can change it if they want to, and then they have 4 public meetings about it, and then they vote on the map. They vote on whichever map they want. Yeah. That is as close to as independent as you can get under the current system, the way it's set up in Fort Worth.
Yeah.
If they change the charter election to the point where they could write in an independent, where it's like the city government, like city staff maybe comes in and offers some professional expertise about how this is done, because the Costa, the assistant city manager Costa, he knows he's the Bud Kennedy of redistricting. He knows this back and forth, and they could use his professional expertise a lot. So if they change the charter election to have that, where it's independent, the city council doesn't select it, that probably might inspire a little bit more confidence in people. But I think the other thing too with redistricting is a lot of it's very nerdy. Yeah. There's a lot of for example, the districts can't be more than 10% larger or 10% smaller than the median of all of, there's the stuff about, trying to create minority opportunity districts and then there was a lot of, I'm sure you guys saw in Jessica's article about trying to create a Latino, more, Hispanic minority opportunity districts. But then there's a thing about voting patterns and how do people vote. And it really is, it is an art. We're, District 9, that's the big one everyone talks about because it's majority Latino and it's been represented by white people for the most part.
Yeah.
And so you can create these districts where you're hoping for a certain outcome, but there's no guarantee you're going to get it.
Yeah.
So, so it's hard. It's really hard, and it's really nerdy. And I think that's part of the reason why certain people care about it, but a lot of people don't, because it's hard for them to wrap their heads around why they should care.
Yeah. And like, we're planning on a snapshot of Fort Worth right now, but like we've talked about, Fort Worth is growing a ton, especially up north. And so like in 10 years, those districts up north will most likely be fairly out of balance with, I would guess, the ones down south and potentially even in the loop still. And like when you scroll through the 7 maps that they chose to like take a deeper look at, like the difference is like a couple blocks in a lot of the difference. Like you scroll through and you're like, oh, these all look the exact same. And until you like spend 20 minutes just like looking at one and zooming in and then going to the next one, you're like, oh, okay, I see where the differences are here, why that might make someone upset. But like, you really have to dedicate time to it. It's not the most user-friendly thing out there.
It's not the most user-friendly thing out there. And from I'm a fairly visual person. And so I look at these maps and it strains my brain to it's like one of those things at a pizza restaurant on a kid's menu, like count all of the differences between the things. And I'm not meaning to be flippant about redistricting, because it's very important to how we govern ourselves as a city. But like, that's one of the reasons why it's really hard to, because you can move it over a block and all of a sudden you're splitting a minority opportunity district or a community of interest, or, you're trying to get all of these competing interests. There's 10 criteria. There's the 5 ones they're really supposed to care about. There's the 5 ones that are important, but if they don't happen, it's not a big deal. Is the easiest way to describe it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cooks in this kitchen, which sometimes makes it pretty decent gumbo, and sometimes just get really hot, wet, disgusting water.
Yeah. You mentioned you listened to the pod and you wanted to get some of our takes about growth. What do you have for us? What do you feel like from hearing our bantering? What kind of feels like something you want to open up or discuss?
Yeah. Can you just tell me, like you were talking about, I never heard you guys joke about, it's not Fort Worth, it's Alliance, Texas, or like things like that, about how like there's a lot of growth outside the loop up north, but you feel like inside the loop is getting sort of neglected because of all the growth. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that, about how you feel?
Yeah. I mean, I think like you've mentioned that Fort Worth needs to decide what it wants to be. And I think that it hasn't had an identity for a long time, where we, still pay our council members $20,000. We pay our mayor $25,000 and act like it's a part-time job. But like we've kept annexing land on, and because of that, like people have flocked to empty space and warehouses have flocked to empty space and brought jobs with it. And so like we grew up as this kind of suburb town, and now like look around and we're 6'10", 350 pounds, and like we don't know what to do with our limbs anymore. And so like for me it's tough. Like I used to work at the Amazon warehouse up by Alliance Airport. So like I would make that drive there and back every day. Most of my associates like lived in that area. A lot of the management like moved in from out of town, so they just saw a point on a map where the warehouse was going to be and bought a house or found an apartment up there. And like they don't know Fort Worth at all. Like they don't really come into downtown. Like it is an entirely different place to them than it is to someone living in the near South Side or really inside the loop at all. And I feel like the competing interests of those two are just so far apart, where it's really tough to like try and govern a city that has become as sprawling as it has without filling in any density at all. And so it is like Fort Worth needs to decide like, yeah, we want to be a big kid city and we want to fill in this density and make sure that we have the infrastructure to support that. Or like, I don't know, maybe I don't know the possibility or how that would even work. But like maybe Fort Worth does need to say like, hey, maybe we've gotten too spread out for our own good and like can't manage ourselves anymore and like need to figure out setting up all these other local governments.
Yeah, we mentioned how we would be okay if Fort Worth was 400,000 people and it was just the people in the loop, and we went to the 50th, largest city, because then I think you could really create a proud group of people who identify with their culture, with the culture of the city. It would be like, like having Collin County and Dallas County together. Collin County is, before, since Tarrant County is starting to go blue, it's the largest, red county. And so you have, the people up there in Frisco, McKinney voting about what people want in South Oak Cliff, Deep Ellum, Bishop Arts. It's just two different worlds. And when you see, Alliance is kind of on the same latitude as those suburbs. It's just, but I also think a lot of it has to do with, us being kind of one of the largest metros with Republican power. The more they can leach into and grab, it can stay that way. So it's just, those are the things that I think makes it why we're so, we talk about it, even though that have no idea how that would ever work, but it's just, I think, something we continue to fuss about.
Well, and I think
I'm sorry, can I jump in here?
Yeah, go for it.
So it's interesting, you mentioned like how it's grown and you mentioned the Republican power thing. The interesting corollary I want to bring in here is Gary, Indiana. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar.
Yeah.
Besides the Music Man reference, if you were a musical theater geek at all. So Gary, Indiana, Northwest Indiana, home of the Jacksons, big steel town. It basically gets a lot of bad rap for being high poverty, high crime and stuff like that. One of the things with Gary that didn't happen is they tried to annex sort of wealthier suburbs or unincorporated parts of the county to bring that tax base into the city of Gary and sort of to help raise the tax base so they can do more in the city, but they weren't able to do that. And so they're basically the city, they got boxed in by these suburbs all around, and wealth left Gary. And there's, interestingly enough, a lot of this happened right around the time they elected their first black mayor. So if you want to read between the lines there might be something, but I don't know. It's just correlation rather than causation. I don't know. But anyways, so I look at it from that perspective of Gary wasn't allowed to grow, and so Gary became what it is today. I mean, they're coming back. They're still doing good things. They're honestly, they're right. If you're working in Chicago, you jump on a train, you're in the city real quick. You don't have to take on 95. It's perfect. It's a perfect place to live, frankly, from that perspective. But because it wasn't allowed to grow, it sort of died. So I look at it from sort of there's that perspective. And the other thing too is, it's growing up in these suburban areas, but a lot, like you look at the redistricting map about where, especially the Latino population in Fort Worth, they're everywhere, and a lot of them are really far up in the north there. Like the story I did about Bailey Boswell Road and area around Saginaw. A lot of those kids were Latino kids or kids of color. Where these are homes that are still relatively affordable for the area. And like before the pandemic, like I thought about being a homeowner, but like I didn't think that would be something that was in my future. And then I saw what it's like to spend all of your time in a 600 square foot apartment in St. Petersburg, Florida, with a questionable paint choice. And I was like, okay, I understand why homeownership now. I get it. And to come to a place like Fort Worth, where that opportunity, especially up north, where they're putting up houses like like popcorn ceilings, like you do, or like they're spraying it around all over the place up there. That opportunity is there, and I mean, other than the fact that the commute would be a pain in the tuchus, and that it's just houses and they're still building up all the rest of the infrastructure. It's like that's still really appealing to a lot of people. So I get it, but I think there's more going on up there than just it's white people who don't want to live next to brown people.
And that's what Kyle mentioned. How the majority, like the growth outside of the loop is actually Latino, and actually the moving into the city is into the white people moving into minority neighborhoods in the loop. Like, so this idea of white flight is actually not true. They're coming back. They're moving on down. Or something. I don't know if that's a good allegory, but
and that's like where our lack of investment in public transit, I think, really plays into making it feel as far as it is. Like the drive up and down 35 is miserable. I would never wish it on anybody. Like, it's half the reason that I wanted to quit that job is because it was, I mean, at 4 a.m. I was driving up there and there was still traffic. Like, how are there this many people outside of their house right now that you have figured out how to make traffic right here for so long? And like, if we had a DART type of system that obviously you have to sell it well for people to use it, but it makes home ownership up there more accessible for people that work in the city because you can get down here in probably a similar amount of time to sitting in the car, but like you can be productive or you could sleep. But just making that accessible, I think, is something that like Fort Worth needed to invest in 20 years ago as it started to grow. And now you look at the price tag on it and it's like, oh, wow, okay, people are going to pass on that.
It's hard. It's really hard to build. Like the cities with the great transit systems are, well, there's two things they all share in common. One, they were built when horse was the fastest way to get around.
Yeah.
And two, actually, it's mostly that one thing. They were built because that was the way that it was. Like, oh my God, a train was the fastest way to get around. Like I said, I grew up in a town like literally right on the border of Boston. Like if the Rolling Stones played Fenway, I could hear them from my front porch. Like that's where I was. And we took the T everywhere. And my folks, so my family's Greek. My parents have been staying the past few months in Athens, Greece. Because my mom was an academic and she was doing a sabbatical there. And fortunately, I got to go visit for Christmas. And we're walking around Athens, again, very old city, horse fastest mode of transit, or, marathon running, if that's your thing. And everywhere is super walkable because of that. And you'll see Luke tweet about this on Twitter, obviously it's a retweet, but you see, urban planning Twitter is saying like, we build cities around a car and not around the person. And that's one of the reasons why we have traffic because, parking is an issue because we need to park.
Yeah.
If we didn't need to park, parking wouldn't be an issue.
Right.
Like I'm very fortunate with where I live. I live a 20-minute walk from my office. If I could get my butt in gear to get my bike to a repair shop to make sure that it's not going to fall apart when I get on it, I could bike to work. So I'm really lucky with my situation. But if my fiance and I, we're getting married this year and then we're looking to get in a house. If we move further out, I'm going to have to drive to work every day. It costs $15 a day to put my car in the lot at the Star Telegram. That's an extra expense plus the extra money on gas and all that other stuff. If we had a transit system, it would be good. But you have to, in order to get people to buy into a transit system, you have to get them to rethink what a city is supposed to be.
Right.
That's a hard thing to do.
I also think like something I think about too, about this house ownership aspiration is Texas is kind of known about like, oh, you want to live the American dream, buy a house with a yard, you go to Texas, right? Like Boston is very Europe, East Coast where people are comfortable living in townhomes, little yards, people on top of them or under them, where in Texas it's this idea of
You build your own empire.
having this house with some land. And so I think that makes it also difficult with the density discussion, because a lot of people come to Texas or believe Texas is the big house culture.
It is the big house culture, and big house being a large home, not prison, but it is that. But and there is. It's interesting how like people talk about Fort Worth versus Dallas, with like, oh, Dallas is the fake Cowboys, we're the real Cowboys and stuff like that, and sort of this Western thing. And it's interesting for me coming from Arizona, where it's the only place that, and I think Southern New Mexico, the only place that still have saguaros, and that's like. That is the, sort of when people think of the West, like all of them, like most of the Western movies are shot up in the Navajo Nation, up in Monument Valley up there. Arizona is where we created the vision of what the West is. And so sort of this trying to recreate it. I mean, like, look, if you raise cattle and that's your thing, like, God bless you. But I haven't bought boots and I haven't bought a cowboy hat yet because I would look like an imposter, and I don't, and I don't really want to. I mean, and not, it's just like I haven't lived here long enough to be able to own that culture. But like, we're trying to recreate something and try to create something which, look, we have the freedom to do that. It's America. This is what we're allowed to do. But how do we? The thing we're constantly negotiating is how do we live together? The way I like to think about society is it's one giant group home where we're all trying to figure out what our spot is on the chore wheel and who has space in the fridge, and everyone wants to live in a 1-bedroom apartment, but we all live in a giant group house where we're all sharing the same fridge, and we all have to figure out who's doing what on the chore wheel. So, and that's that, and people don't want to live that way, and I get it. I come from a big Greek family. There's a lot of infighting and this, that, and the other thing, because we're families. That's the way family's supposed to work. You want to have your independence, you want to choose your own thing. But the reason we have survived so long as a species is because we found ways to work together and support each other. And we still got to find ways to do that. You're never going to be completely free of the people who are around you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned the cowboy culture, and I think that is also something that we harp on a lot. If it's growth outside of the loop, it's also probably how much we are attached to the cowboy culture of Fort Worth. I think that's probably another thing that I agree with you, where it feels like if you don't own cowboy boots or a hat, you don't feel like you're a part of Fort Worth, which I feel that's also unfair. And also I feel like my biggest thing is seeing how much we've attached ourselves to the stockyards, which again, we always kind of say on the pod, I'm a fan of the cowboy culture. Pennsylvania got Amish culture, but they're not over here making it the number one priority. You can still have a place to go and like
and throw batteries at Santa Claus. Yeah, 100%.
Like, it's just like, I feel like it's like we've made it so big. And when I think of us losing Rivian or we're losing companies, it's you can't be an act. You have to eventually be somewhere like an Atlanta, which is high dense, technically smaller. Somewhere like Boston, high dense, technically smaller. Something like Nashville, but
Atlanta's public transit.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Density, it's great. Like,
their traffic's the worst.
And if they get a half an inch of snow, that city shuts down.
Yeah.
But of course they're not planned for it. But like, we got to be more than. I mean, that's why they talk about this is where the modern West is. I think the thing that's most interesting about Fort Worth is we are still deciding what that means,
Mm-hmm.
and that is the conversation we are all having. Is what does that mean? Eventually I will get a cowboy hat because eventually I will live here long enough where I feel like I've earned that, that right. Like I'm a Boston Red Sox fan because I rooted for them when they stunk. I'm a Patriots fan because I rooted for them when they stunk. I did not start rooting for the Celtics until they started getting good. So I don't consider myself a fan because I haven't suffered it. I feel this, and I feel the same way about, getting boots. Like if I'm practically going to use boots, to like go out and do something in my reporting job, I will get a pair of boots because that's because I need them for work. And oh, by the way, they also kind of look cool. If I need a hat because, I need to keep the sun off my very pasty face, I will do that. But like, I'm not not going to a George Strait impersonation competition here. And I'm not, I feel like Fort Worth, that's part of the culture. That's part of what we've always been. And it'll be interesting to define, but we are so much more than just cowboys and culture. We are, and it is, I feel privileged to be able to be here, to be on the sidelines and figuring out what that's going to mean and how we have that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really cool way to tie it up. A really good word. Like what is the modern West, and how do we want to define that? We don't want it to be Austin. We don't want it to be Dallas. We want it to be distinctly Fort Worth. And finding that balance in between is kind of what the city has set forth for itself to do.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I think is very interesting about this city, besides all of it, because I have to think everything's interesting, is how much, like, I see it with you guys, I see it at city council, I see it with everybody is like how much everyone genuinely cares about making this place great. Like everyone, like I can see it. Everyone, like, sure, we disagree about how we do that, but everyone like genuinely really gives a lot of care. I was censoring myself because I was going to say a bad word. Cares a lot about making this place great, and it is just so refreshing to see that, and I love that. That's one of the things I love about Fort Worth.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, Harrison, we appreciate you spending the time with us. You're our first Star Telegram representative to join the pod, so
that's awesome.
And hopefully, honestly, it's not the last that you join us. We love to have you on other big stories that you have going on. And
I appreciate you guys having me on. Honestly, it's like I said, I've been a long time listener, first time caller. But it's really, thank you guys for having me on. It's a big honor. I appreciate it.
Awesome. That was great. We're hopeful that we'll have Harrison back on more, especially as he has big stories that he's covering, and we want to continue to get the word out about. But
let's be clear, that was only like half of our conversation because we all became best friends and laughing and talking about stuff. He was really hilarious. It was really cracking me up.
Yeah, we're excited to continue to get to know him and call him a friend now, not just the guy behind the keyboard. You ready to go into wins and losses?
Yeah, let's do it.
I'll start with my loss, and it is that Fort Worth Mayor Maddie Parker declined to support the Voting Rights Act. It was also in the headlines this week that the Arlington mayor did support the Dallas did support the Voting Rights Act. I don't know that this like matters. It's like I saw this headline, I read the story, and I'm like, I'm not surprised. I don't even know that I'm disappointed because it's expected and it doesn't like really carry any weight to it. The people who I actually care about if they support the Voting Rights Act are Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, who both don't and shouldn't be in office because of that. But like, we need to make voting as accessible and easy as possible. And it is a bummer that the leader of the 13th biggest city in the country cannot voice her support for that because it is a political gambit.
Yep.
We've spent millions of dollars auditing the 2020 election with nothing found. The only things really found have been forged votes for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And it is...
You saw that Tarrant County results that you showed, like 12 errors of like 500,000 votes.
Yeah.
And it was like, like what you
and it's
said.
like mismatching signatures and stuff like that. Like, it is silly that it is a political point whether it should be easy or difficult to vote.
Yeah.
And it is a bummer that our mayor chooses to play the political games when she advertised herself as a neutral party and not Democrat or Republican, but she comes here and is clearly just playing the Republican side.
Because the Arlington mayor is a Democrat or a Republican, do we know?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see where the other Republican mayors played on signing this list, because that would just be interesting. But my whole take on this, though, is where this is where people get impacted by is like, oh, when we have an Opal event and you come to Southside and you hold black kids' hands and you act like you're for the people, and then this happens. It's the battle of. That's the part that I feel like maybe a lot of the communities are not going to know about this story.
Right.
Like this is, so they will have no idea that this is happening while, we're advocating for African American museums and celebrating Opal and participating in that. But then in the back with your cards,
right,
you're not throwing down your ace when they need you to.
Yeah.
So, but no, yeah. So my loss is we're losing a cool place in Fort Worth called the Crockett Hall, the food court in 7th Street, West 7th area. It is now closing for good, and that is a bummer because I think big cities have iconic food halls. Granted, I don't think West 7th is maybe, again, like this has always been a dead zone. I mean, the Bar Louie is closing. Everything's closing. I don't even know why people keep hitting more and more bars there. I mean, there's a new row of bars like every time I go there, and I'm just wondering how are they going to sustain? And I think this is an example of not only can Fort Worth residents afford our apartments, our small businesses can't afford the prices you'd be putting on these rents because they're overhyped. Not true value of assets.
Yeah.
And this is what power looks like with real estate, which drives me crazy because it impacts apartment owners, people who want a house, and people who are trying to do something really cool like Crockett Hall that can't afford to do it anymore.
Yeah, and I think from the outside, West 7th, Crockett Row looks like an appealing thing. Like you have a significant population of people who are essentially locked into this area that you think that you can continue to get traffic from, but they've made it so unappealing for anybody other than the people living in those
100%.
apartments to go there that your market base is so finite and it's just not sustainable to continue to try and attract people to there. And like we loved the food hall. We thought it was great. Like, but we hadn't been since the pandemic started because it doesn't super lend itself to driving in, parking, having to go make sure you get your ticket validated, and then leaving because you don't want to like sit and hang out there. So I agree. Like public markets and food halls are like one of the first things that we seek out when we go to new cities. And Fort Worth has just never really been able to do either of them super well or support either of them super well. So I agree. I was bummed when I saw it. I wasn't surprised. But I think it just does speak to if you're a small business not in the near South Side, like it is an uphill battle. Before the pandemic, it was an uphill battle, and now, especially during everything, it continues to be a little bit steeper than it is for those businesses as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go ahead and dive into my win, and then you can take us home. So my win is last week I kind of talked about how there was nothing around. Like I feel like we're losing on like the fuel tank on what happened after George Floyd and how so many people got active on race relations and black history in America. But after that pod came out, the Fort Worth Report released a news story about how an African American museum cultural center could come to Fort Worth, and our organizers are currently engaging workshops and discussions with the community to kickstart the Fort Worth African American Museum and Cultural Center. Obviously, there's a lot of history here around that and the impact of the Ku Klux Klan in Fort Worth. And we also have the National Juneteenth Museum coming in the summer of 2024. And it's a big list of, 21 members on this council who's trying to curate the conversations, get people excited about the idea. So I think it's a win because I've always believed that Fort Worth can be a destination, not just for cowboy culture, but for, African-American history and people coming to a city to learn more. And we have a great linchpin with the Juneteenth Museum now set to be here in Fort Worth.
Yeah, totally agree. My win is that in Arlington, the city council flipped to reject the gas well drilling permit for TEP Barnett right next to daycare. So in November, the city council voted very controversially to allow some oil drilling, like right next to a daycare. I was surprised initially that they voted for it because of how much public outcry against it there was. So the owners of the daycare sued, filed a lawsuit saying that around like its effects on air quality, children's health, and a city council member flipped. Now it is voted down. Really, the lawsuit contended that a city ordinance required a supermajority vote for the council to approve such a permit, which they did not have. TEP Barnett can go through the process again, which I'm sure they probably will, but at least for now, that is a win for the voices of the community working against a corporation.
Yep, 5-4. One person switched. One person who voted yes on November 30th voted no. Your local elections matter, who you vote in your seats. This is a great example. Looking forward to see how the rest of that goes. Well, Jimmy, I know we had a lot to discuss, and we had a great interview. I think this is going to be one of my favorite episodes in a long time. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it as well. Last minute things. Spotify has a new rating system, so now you can rate with 5 stars on a podcast. So if you're a Spotify listener, would love to get some love there if you could. And the same with Apple, even though Apples are not as high as like the Spotify one. It's literally right under the picture. So thank you for listening, and looking forward to the next pod.
Yeah, thanks for listening. See you next time.
Control your life, dopamine swipe. Follow us like double tap. Now they control your life, control your life.